Welcome to the American Intelligence Media. I'm your host, Douglas Gabriel. Today we are continuing our conversations with Michael McKibben and John Barnwell, and we have a topic. And that topic recently has become so crystal clear to us that the research that we have done nailed it and showed you the evidence to prove that Five Eyes and the British connection with America through its intelligence and all the other nonsense of Serco and the stealing our patents and everything else has been going on since basically 1913. Recently, we received some congressional reports from particularly some reports that were read into the congressional hearing, Andrew Carnegie's own words relating to the Rothschilds, relating to Cecil Rhodes. So Rhodes Round Table and particularly the Pilgrim Society. And these documents were showing that the Pilgrim Society in America is nothing more than the people who still want us to be united with the monarchy of England. Period. These are people who have been, the Pilgrim Society has been fighting basically 1776 since 1776. And the people on the list, because this was a document directly from very top officials inside of the Pilgrim Society, and then it shows you a whole list of things which verify everything that we have been saying. But we just got a hold of this document just recently, within the last few hours, within the last few days. Literally, we've only looked at it for a few hours. But what it does show is that everything that we have tried to show you that is not a conspiracy theory, but in fact has plenty of evidence to support it, is real, and that it goes on to this very day, and that the British Crown Gate, the British attack against our sitting president and meddling in our election, that's the tip of the iceberg. This document shows that the Scots, who fought for freedom against the English, they say is an analogy for Canada fighting against America to make America reunite with Canada so that it will become again a Commonwealth nation like Canada is. In other words, the Pilgrim Society and all the people who got us into World War I and World War II and all their propaganda coming out of Britain all wanted one thing: the reunion of basically what they call an Anglophile racist imperialism, including England and America. And Cecil Rhodes, and William Stead says this in a variety of ways, and particularly in the will of Cecil Rhodes, it says particularly that he wants America and England to reunite, and therefore he created a scholarship to keep training Rhodes scholars to become politicians, to keep the Pilgrim Society going, to keep the Round Table ideas going, which then became the Royal Institute for International Studies and became basically what we call the Council on Foreign Relations in America. So everything we have shown you of the 100-year history of Cecil Rhodes' intent to take over America while they're taking over the world has now again been reinforced by documents from the 1940s, because people knew this back then. They've forgotten it in our age. And nobody has done better research than this than my two friends who are here, John and Michael. So, gentlemen, hack at this British tree, and hopefully we can kill it at the roots, because I'm so tired of the Brits continuing the American Revolution with us.
It's the British invasion.
It is the British invasion continuing.
I'm not sure you're going to kill it at the roots, but I love your analogy.
Nip it in the
bud. So, how many people were killed in World War I, John?
I don't have that number at the top of my head, but it was a large
over
number.
A million,
not as large as were killed in the American Civil War, but it's a very large number.
Okay. So anyway, the idea that men and women for political reasons would sacrifice human beings for a political cause like reforming the British Empire is appalling, but that's what it looked like. And then we started looking more at the contracts that were let by the early technology companies in the UK and the US on wireless, and it really became clear that this fusion of wireless technology and the Tavistock Institute and the British Psychological Society established what we now know today as propaganda, and the dissemination of propaganda through media, first radio, then television. So as we marched forward, we kind of stopped at about 1930s and said, okay, we can see this is the pattern. And then we can see this pattern continue today. But this document that Douglas is referring to really put the cornerstone piece in the research, because it's clear that in the congressional record in 1940, the political powers that be in the U.S. were very aware of this Anglophile agenda that our bankers had with the bankers in London to create this Anglo-American alliance, and it just totally validated everything that we've been discovering from our research.
Well, the thing that I liked is the reference to what you just made, empire. They tried to fake us out to make it look like they went from the evil empire to a loving commonwealth.
Right.
No, it's a racist imperialism. An Anglophile debate, that the only debate they had was, will it only be Britons that will be allowed into their hegemony, or will all English speaking people be allowed in? These are the kind of things that they actually discussed. And we discussed a minute ago, perhaps in a joking way, but perhaps not in a joking way, that our dear President Trump MacLeod, is the true Highlander. And the Highlander's name was MacLeod, and he was Scottish and a Highlander. And then now we see that Andrew Carnegie said that the Canadians were just like the Scots. But he was saying the Scots need to, because he was on the Scots side, the Canadian side, to go to war with America. Andrew Carnegie literally says in this document, it is Canadian destiny to take over America. Unbelievable. But we know that NAFTA was in fact an attempt to unite Canada, America, and Mexico. And that's what it was supposed to do. It was supposed to create one kingdom, and that kingdom would have been under Queen Hillary. And I think, as we said in a previous talk recently, that by then, of course, Hillary would have turned Damascus into ashes, would have been into at least a huge conflagration, perhaps another world war, with either Russia or China or both, and a few other choice things that she had already had planned on her table, that was set out there for the British to do what? To come over and to make all of Canada, America, and Mexico the same Commonwealth nation that they control. This is the evil that has never been defeated in our first American Revolution. That's the reason that we have said from the beginning, we are anonymous patriots, we are fighting the Second American Revolution, and we believe that Donald Trump really is like George Washington in a way, and now I get a good laugh out of seeing him as the Highlander, because there can be only one.
Well, it's a fascinating subject with a great deal of history behind it that's unknown to most Americans especially, but it has to do ultimately with the machinations that happened in England because of the dissatisfaction of certain business interests in England, that they overthrew the Jacobite line of kings, and you get into that, and I've gotten into some of the history in some of the recent talks I've done with Leo Zagami, and the founding of Freemasonry, and how that was a fundament of Scottish Freemasonry that created a context for mutual toleration, and that the King James Bible of the original first edition, the 1611 edition, is actually a foundation document in law, and that in British courts still to this day in common law one can make recourse to the King James Bible and use that as a premise for building one's defense. And so it's quite interesting. But when you start getting into some of the machinations that the British we're willing to get into when you get into understanding the testament of Lord George, and how his last will and testament said that he wanted to create an organization similar to the Jesuits.
You talking about Lloyd George or Cecil
I mean
Rhodes?
Cecil Rhodes.
Oh, okay.
And in which he involved Lloyd George, Lord Milner, and a couple other characters. And but it's really interesting because in December 9th of 1916, the British Prime Minister David Lloyd George formed a 5-person war cabinet. Okay, and since then, the Britons have made it an issue to make Russia the bad guys. That's always Russia, 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 all the time. So if somebody starts going Russia, 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 then you should be looking for Britain, 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 or specifically Crown, 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 because it's coming out of the Privy Council. But since then, in 1916, the Crown made Russia the brunt of their machinations, and see, the Parliament had made a decision to give assistance to the Russian Tsar, Nicholas II, who was King George's cousin, right? And but the emissary that was sent over there was Lord Alfred Milner, and he went to Russia, and he did not give Tsar Alexander the funds. And it was very soon after Lenin, who had been financed by the bankers, he began the revolution of 1917, and one of the first things that Lenin did was he arranged for the execution of the Tsar and his whole family. So that's at the root of so what current events are today. It leads back to that.
And one of the things that's often left out of these histories is that prior to that, Lloyd George, when he was a member of Parliament, and one other member of Parliament actually bought stock in Marconi, the American version of Marconi, and it became a scandal within Parliament that he barely survived. Yeah. But then, magically, he subsequently becomes Prime Minister.
Yeah. And see, when you get into some of this, it becomes so obscure that although you do have quite a few British listeners and from other Commonwealth nations that are listeners for American intelligence media, very few of them realize some of what I'm about to disclose right now that I had to put together myself because I didn't find it in any books. I haven't found any articles written about it. But there's been a struggle that's gone on for quite some time between the City of London and the noble houses of England. Now, when William the Conqueror came to England in 1066, they established a system of government. And it was based where you have, your dukes and all the various counts and barons and all the various levels of nobility. Now, in that system, still to this day, by large measure, probably 90% of the noble houses in England are of this Norman descent. They're descended from the actual entourage of William the Conqueror that came in 1066. But when William came to England in 1066, he was unable to capture the City of London, which is the square mile proper that had been founded by the Roman Empire as a trading center, a walled trading center. And because he could not overcome them, he made a deal with the residents of the City of London, which were the merchants and the traders, because it was a trading center. And what people don't realize that those were the Anglo-Saxons. And they had cut a deal with Edward the Confessor quite a while earlier, so that they had a special arrangement to conduct trade with a special provision attached to the crown. And William the Conqueror said, look, here's what I'll do. I'll honor that. You can continue that agreement. It's a special dispensation from the Crown for the Anglo-Saxon powers of the City of London to conduct business as they have since, ancient Roman times. And so it's continued to this day. And so there's been this struggle between the powers within the City of London, the Anglo-Saxon powers, of which Douglas was just speaking, and the noble Norman houses. And it's interesting because fairly recently the House of Lords has been quite disempowered. And there are quite a few of the nobility of the noble houses that took very seriously their responsibilities of maintaining their baronage or whatever noble dispensation they were working under. And it's not voluntary. If you're born and you become like an earl, for example, there's only two ways to get out of it. You can either die or commit a felony so bad that you have it stripped from you. So this is an involuntary dispensation under which they've been operating under. But you have quite a few of them that are very responsible, but they've been disempowered. And this is in very, very recent times. And so you see that now the City of London has really gained the upper hand in political affairs. And you look in the Privy Council and you look at its current members and you look at these people and you go, who are these people? Why are these people so important? When Lord Mark Malloch Brown, you have to look and you see that his wife is a direct descendant of some of the leaders of the Hudson Bay Company and the East India Company, and a part of this whole trading network that was based out of the City of London. And then you get Sir Geoffrey Patty and all these characters. You start tracing it down, you see that that's a very clear expression of what I've just been discussing, that there's this whole Anglophile inner core of this group that's not only overthrowing America and other Commonwealth nations, but it's literally overthrown the powers of the noble houses of England too. It's quite fascinating, and it's nowhere to be found in books or in literature. You have to piece it together yourself.
So you're saying members of the Privy Council are overthrowing the
yes,
the families.
Yes.
And that would
the
be
ones
consistent.
the ones that won't go along.
So this idea of British federalism is what they're trying to get to.
Yes,
that's run by the companies out of the City of London.
It's a corporatocracy. It's basically a neo-feudalism, fascism, crony capitalism.
I think the British East India Company just called it trading with a sword. And it's been going on since they were created in the Dutch East India Company, and eventually those corporations became more powerful than England itself, and eventually were subsumed by England. And those corporations really have not ended to this very day, and you could literally also say that the American Revolution came out of a tension between the Dutch East India Company and the British East India Company fighting over America and who was going to control it, whether it would be with the slaves brought to the South and the things that they were bringing back from the islands through the Dutch East India Company, or whether it would be the textiles and the taxes and the goods that were taken out of the northern colonies by Britain and the British East India Company. So it was hard to tell what was a corporation and what was Britain. And what John has just pointed at is the City of London is different from London. And the City of London is, since time immemorial, has been a place where the people who controlled everything in terms of economics have ran their hegemony. Eventually it became learned from, of course, the Venetians, but it became an Anglophile hegemony. They wished to take over the whole world. And you can read in these documents, both from Cecil Rhodes, from Andrew Carnegie, and also quoting the Rothschilds, that is exactly what their plan was. And they laid it out in how many years it would take to take over Palestine, to take over America through Canada, to take over all the different parts that they eventually have taken over, all except for America. And they clearly state that the British intent is to have a British Zionist Israeli association. And that when you say Israel, you say Britain, Zionist Britain. And when you also are talking about the bankers, they don't call it bankers. Andrew Carnegie doesn't call it bankers. He calls them literally Jewish international money changers. And they are nailing the fact that in 1913, as we have repeatedly, when the U.S. Federal Reserve and the IRS and all the other evil things were created, that was a British attack upon American sovereignty. And that they won. And that this moment we owe trillions of dollars to the very people who set up what was set up in 1913, which was the also set up for World War I and II, to bring America into war so that through that alliance we could be this special friend with the monarch of England, which they always claim they're not a monarchy and that they're just, a figurehead. Wrong. That is incorrect. We now have documents that show that the Queen, literally, the monarchy is ordering things to be done in America. And people are taking those orders. It's just absolutely amazing. So now we call it the Anglo-American Alliance. But really, what it is, and you can see this now in Britain, is it's a fight between, as John just pointed out, the Privy Council and the Parliament. And the Parliament is really just a joke. And the Anglo-American Alliance, it isn't happening. Bojo, remember Boris Johnson was Trump's enemy. He came out and cussed at Trump and called him every name in the book. And now he's his best friend because he knows the only trade alliance that will save Britain if he's going to be the leader of England and the United Kingdom is through Trump. We have to go back to the imperialism of the British that made Cecil Rhodes think it was okay for him to go to South Africa and steal all their gold and all their diamonds, to this very day controlled by De Beers, and the gold controlled by the Rothschilds. And this was okay. This was all right with the Brits. It was okay that the British East India Company, which was the very land that Cecil Rhodes started off with in what was later, South Africa, I think later called Rhodesia. But the point is, and the Transvaal, where he stole all the gold and started a processing system to steal the diamonds too. And to this very day, De Bry is still in control as a monopoly of the diamonds of the world. And the Rothschilds are still in control of the gold. Thank you very much, Cecil Rhodes.
De Beers,
excuse me. And so you get to see that they thought this was okay. Because the British East India Company thought it was okay that if you don't give us all of your goods and we don't get to fleece your country, we're going to kill you and just take your country, which is what they did over and over again. And they basically were trying to do that here in America, and it didn't quite work out, and they're still trying to do it now. And the British East India Company and the Dutch East India Company we've gone into, they still exist in just different forms, just as I think both of our other speakers have said today. These things just, what do you call it, transmogrify, or they just change. They when a British company opens, they open 3 dummy companies. So when that first company is destroyed, because it will be because of their immoral activity, they already have 3 other companies that take over. And then they shift the money around, and it's all hidden under the guise of philanthropy. And these, what I really, really dislike is the stations that are underneath the monarchy for people because they're born into certain bloodlines that they are better than other people. I don't go for any of that. I don't believe in lords and ladies and barons, and I don't believe in kings and queens. That time is past.
Well, I think that they're not going to get rid of that because in the corporatist model, I think what we see is they're using these titles to keep everybody in line. And they start out with lesser titles like CBE or OBE, and then after a while, this person will do more to pursue the agenda, and then they'll give him a higher title. A baron or a lord, and then eventually they'll become a knight, and then maybe a viscount like you, Douglas.
That's what I want to be.
I give you you're a viscount in my mind. And anyway, they go through this life. So what we see, for example, the organization that organized Five Eyes on starting on March 5th of 1946. Every Brit that we know of, because they're still redacting this document, every Brit we know of in that organization, all but one, became a knight afterwards. And almost all of them became, at one point or another, a director of GCHQ after the war. So they were using these titles as a control mechanism, like a tether, like like you see when see somebody with leashes on their children. They're walking down to keep their kids in line. They have these leashes, and that's what those titles have become. So I don't think they're going to get rid of them because it's too effective.
Well, they're not going to get rid of it, and that brings in another layer, because this is like an onion. This has many, many layers. And Cecil Rhodes, in his last will and testament that was put out by W.T. Stead, and Stead is a very interesting person. He did some good things. He's the one that made them raise the age where a child could be involved sexually, for example. That's a good thing he did. But nonetheless, in getting into understanding this, you have to understand that Cecil Rhodes states specifically it was based on the Jesuit system, because the Jesuits have been doing this for so long, so effectively, all over the world. And consequently, you look into this and you go, well, how tied in is this whole crown experience and the knight title, for example?
Right.
Well, all the knightly orders of Europe are subservient to the Vatican. All of them. That's the oldest of them is the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre, okay, of Godfrey of Bouillon. And so, consequently, there's a long, long tradition of this relationship of your orders of knighthood to the Vatican. And so when you get into understanding the issue of domain sovereignty, the City of London is a sovereign state, all on its own, the square mile, as they call it. The Vatican is a sovereign state. It's not subjected to the laws of Italy. Nobody can look into the Vatican finances. Likewise, nobody can look into the finances of the Queen of England. Washington, D.C. is a sovereign state. Most people don't know that. But Washington, D.C. Proper also includes, by the way, Puerto Rico, Midway Island, and a few territories like that, right? They're all within that same domain where certain types of activities occur that are under a different set of laws than the states of the United States. And so these are things that the average person doesn't know. There's a few other sovereign states like Singapore, and Hong Kong is going through tremendous struggle right now because they do not want to give up their sovereignty to the Communist Chinese. But the Communist Chinese are bound and determined to bring them under heel, which is an interesting struggle, because I like to hear what the Queen thinks about that whole thing, because Hong Kong was a British protectorate, as everybody knows. They have museums in China showing how the Brits misused the Chinese and got them addicted to opium that was grown in India and so on and so forth. So that it's a very disturbing history. And then when you get into the history of the Jesuits and you go like, well, why is South America having so many problems? You look in, well, the first Jesuit state founded in South America was Paraguay. Well, George H.W. Bush bought a bunch of land in Paraguay, and who owned the land right next to him? Okay, well, she's the Prime Minister of Germany. Wow. I mean, you could just keep following these things down. Surprise. And so when you get into understanding the way world finance is being run through the Knights of Malta and the equestrian order and all these various orders of knighthood. These are very, very exclusive clubs that we don't belong to.
So are you saying that the British peerage system is connected with all that?
Absolutely.
Okay. So you got off on this by saying that they're going to keep that.
Well, it's a system that they've done for so long that they're not going to stop doing it. I mean, there you have what they call the black nobility. It has nothing to do with anything racial at all. They're nobility that are displaced. They no longer have a domain, but they still have their title. That's some of the wealthiest families in Europe, for example, like the Pallavicini, who were... It was one of the Pallavicini who converted to Islam and has been serving as a liaison between the Islamic people in Italy and the CIA, for example. I mean, it's very, very...
Well, let me ask you, some of these newer peers like Nick Clegg and Baron Richard Allen, they seem pretty lightweight in terms of their history, their family. So how did they get in? And it I guess it just seems to me like they're using those peerage titles just as a way to keep them in line.
Yeah, it's a way. It's a commitment. It's much like what we have here when we have the military. You take oaths, right?
Right.
And if you don't fulfill the oath, there are consequences. These are very real things. We don't take it seriously here, but a lot of these oaths in Europe, they're taken very seriously. Mm-hmm. All you have to do is remember the member of the P2 Lodge that was hung upside down from the bridge. Remember? That was a very important thing.
Well, you're tying a lot of threads together because the Vatican Bank is nothing more than the continuation of the Venetian bankers, and the Bank of England is nothing more than a branch bank of the Venetian bankers who came through Germany and through Holland, the Dutch banks. So when we're talking about this, you nailed it. It doesn't matter. Okay, even these documents we're looking at, they make a clear distinction between the English people and the British monarchical system. Huge difference, because remember, the monarchical system is German because it comes from the Saxe, Coburg, and Gotha lineage, which was changed just out of the blue to Windsor because Windsor sounds English. Oh, isn't that lovely? They're actually Germans, don't forget that. Don't forget that in 1913, actually in 1910, they decided that the imperialism of Germany was exactly what England wanted to be, and so they decided they had to destroy Germany and its Aryan hegemony. One race and only one race should rule the world. And this type of imperialism, what I call the evil empire, is exactly what then Britain emulated and wanted to become. Because why? Because the Germans got their desire to rule the world from who? The Jesuits, which John was just pointing out, through the Vatican. So in England, you don't, just like in the Vatican, get to ask anything about the Queen. Queen keeps the money in the Bank of England. Can't ask any questions about the Bank of England, but that's the bank that controls the entire British economy. Can't ask any questions. And even if you did, you'd have to take it to the Queen's Court if you had an issue. And who runs that? That's people on the Queen's Privy Council to make sure that no matter what, the Queen never has any problems economically, socially, with any law, with anything. It doesn't matter. The monarchy is above all the people. That's the evil. And just as you pointed out, I'm going to point out, the Queen takes her fealty to the Knights of Malta. And the Knights of Malta are an extension of the Vatican. So how is it that a Protestant queen is Protestant, we could call it, let's call it Anglican, Episcopal, whatever you want to call it. The Church of England, how is the head of the Church of England taking a vow to someone appointed to run an insider trading economic group that's been going on since a long, long time, which is run by the Pope and the Vatican Bank? How is it that she's taking fealty to that group? Well, because she has to take fealty to them. She takes fealty to the Rothschilds because the Rothschilds have been controlling the Bank of England. They controlled the price of silver, set it twice a day, set the price of gold twice a day. set the LIBOR rate, the interest rates for the whole world, all out of one little teeny tiny office, one telephone that went to the Rothschilds' office. And then the Gold Bullion Bank, which is owned by the Rothschilds, has all the fake gold, and on and on and on. So you can't be a member of the Privy Council and go against the Queen. And I'm going to tell you the truth of the matter. Members of the Privy Council are not British. And guess what? They're not German either. And guess what? They're new. They're globalists. They're members of the United Nations. Mark Malloch Brown was second in charge of the United Nations when he set up OPTEC and started to control all elections throughout the world as much as he could. So what we see is lie after lie after lie when it comes to Britain. The poor British people, the English people, don't even know these things when you say it to them. And by the way, I have a degree in history, in British history. So I'm not talking off the top of my head, though sometimes I might, but not in this particular case. In this particular case, we're talking about, I didn't know any of this, and I have a degree in it. Not until we found the indictable evidence, traced it back, and saw that this is not a conspiracy. This has been going on for 100 years, and that's the reason that the controls are so fantastically ancient. This is beyond standard operating procedure. This is beyond institutionalization. This is beyond bureaucracy. This is a monarchy that has spread to America through this senior executive service and through our judicial system. And now what do we see? We just see that the Queen is getting closer and closer, was every single day, to taking over America until Donald Trump came along.
Hey, how does Trump take care of this?
How does Trump take care of it?
Yes.
I think we started on this list the other day. Put Arvinder Sambai in jail. Put Alison Saunders in jail. Put Lord Carr in jail for all their involvement with Crown Gate. Don't let them off the hook. Put Robert Hannigan in jail for tapping Trump Towers. Put these people in jail. I don't care that they're British citizens. Put Stephen Halper, dual citizen, in jail. Put Christopher Steele in jail. And if they don't want to put him in jail, fine. Then Five Eyes is over. No more sharing intelligence. We're not going to war with you because you want to create an alliance to attack Syria or attack whoever you want to attack, Iran, whoever, it doesn't matter. Sorry, Britain and France and the other Five Eyes nations, Canada, Australia, New Zealand.
And no bilateral agreement.
And no bilateral trade agreement with you either, Britain. Why? Because you tried to overthrow our president and you really won't stop beating up on us since we declared our independence from you. And we now know, and we've laid out that history of what Trump needs to do to get rid of what started with the British attack in 1913. Get rid of the U.S. Fed, get rid of the IRS, get rid of Social Security, get rid of all these things that create federalism, which is nothing more than a mechanical form of monarchical system, a monarchical system.
Of which the Senior Executive Services is basically the American counterpart to the Privy Council, and which was established in that was 1978 by President Carter, CIA operative President Carter.
That's right.
And so consequently, we have a real dilemma going on here because, again, as we've talked before, at the end of World War I, Sir William Stevenson, who was a Canadian, he determined in his mind that the problems were not over. So out of his own finances, of which were considerable because he founded the Canadian Broadcasting Company, plus he owned considerable amount of industry and steel and all kinds of things. And he created an intelligence service all on his own, privately. And then he approached Winston Churchill and FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, and he told him he already had the thing all started up. And so basically that was the birth of the CIA as the OSS.
In Rockefeller Center.
In Rockefeller Center, yes.
In the U.S.
And the original training was done on the training camp that Sir William Stevenson had established on the north shore of Lake Erie. And so it's a fascinating history. And again, I don't want to disparage all the honorable people that have taken the destiny of serving within those systems. What I'm doing is pointing out the fly in the ointment, because there are certain people serving certain agendas that are not in the best interests of the American citizen. And so consequently, we have to bring this into consciousness, because people's understanding of history is based upon a small number of British authors. I mean, Will and Ariel Durant and Winston Churchill's history books, and it's a very short list, most of them published by Macmillan and Company, which is, Macmillans were a member of the Milner Group, the Cecil Rhodes Circle. So they were able to contain, and if you go back to our previous talk, where I tried to point out that the problem with technology is containment of thinking within. You can control the direction in which the thinking goes, just like when they came out recently, the extent to which Google can influence elections just by search results. And so consequently, there was a publication that came out of Chatham House in the UK. Chatham House is the basically mind control central for the UK, and they were addressing the question, what should we do about the election of President Trump? And it's the darndest thing, because they thought that what they had to do was invest more money in college scholarships. Seriously, that's how long-term...
Keep brainwashing them.
That's how long-term their thinking is.
Mayor Pete is a Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this is very serious. Now, I want to point out one thing.
So is Rachel Maddow.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
Fool.
If a monarch or a commander-in-chief is only as good as their intelligence, and what we have found in this research that has now unfolded, and I liked it when you stood back the other day, Michael, and said, whoa, look, here's the whole picture. Yes, you have literally detailed documents, signatures, and the names, the places, the people, everything you ever wanted to know about how this conspiracy actually unfolded. But it was a conspiracy of consciousness directed not by the leaders of the country or by the people of the country. It was still directed by the people who controlled the intelligence. So Cecil Rhodes was a master at sending back lies about what was happening in South Africa. The British East India Company controlled intelligence and news. The Jesuits controlled intelligence and news. If you can control intelligence, you can start wars, end wars, whatever you want. You can make as much money as you want if you can control intelligence. So the point is, the Privy Council, they're globalists. They're not really Brits. They're not really nice English people. No, they're globalists. And what are they doing? They use intelligence to do what? Counter terrorism. They basically go out and start wars so that they can make money. So when we looked into intelligence, we found that all aspects of U.S. intelligence has been infiltrated by the Brits, not only through Five Eyes, but through corporate manipulation, through the golden share of Lockheed Martin and L3, and on and on and on and on and on, all the things Serco does, and all the other things we've been describing even here today. So the question really is, are we going to be able to get British intelligence out of American intelligence? Otherwise, it doesn't matter who the president is. They're being fed false information. Fortunately, Trump has ignored his intelligence agencies completely, and one day called them into the White House Oval Office to chew them out, and he literally said, take them back to school, because they had lied and lied and lied in congressional testimony, and that's the reason he got rid of Dan Coates. So the point is, the Queen has a Privy Council that provides her intelligence, and it's been set in place for a long time. Can we conquer that? That's the question.
It's a tall order. I mean, Britain's got their own problems right now with Boris Badenoff Johnson. People don't know, but it came out just recently from Steve Pieczenik, who's he was the spokesman for the people in the American intelligence community that were the white hats that asked if President Trump would consider running for president. But from Steve Pachinik, we now know that Boris Johnson was lived on a kibbutz in Israel for a period of time. I never knew that. He said he had to go to the intelligence documents to find that information out about him. It's not available in regular news sources, things like that. And Boris Johnson, who was born in New York, is a very unusual character. Now he's coming off trying to make people think that he's pro-Brexit and almost trying to create illusion like he's pro-Trump. Well, I certainly hope that Trump can work some deals with him, but I doubt the guy's going to be able to keep up with President Trump in the art of making a deal.
The ex-Deputy Prime Minister of England, Nick Clegg, has moved to America to work at Facebook. You see, that's where you go when you leave the fake parliament, is you go to basically what would be considered a non-American, anti-American war actor, which is Facebook. And that's where Nick Clegg took his skills next. But that's the kind of thing we're talking about. That's the kind of intelligence infiltration. They have to stop the spread of intelligence through Facebook or Google or anything else, or else they may not win the elections the way that the British Privy Council has decided.
Well, we've if we look at this 100 years, one of the central themes you see in intelligence is that they needed to take over and monopolize technology in order to develop their systems. So if it can be developed, it can be undeveloped. And we've talked about this before. I think that what's got to happen is there's got to be an inventory of what they're doing now. And once you have the inventory, then you can dismantle it or redirect it. But I don't think there are any simple answers to this. But there's got to be an inventory, look at the engineering, look at the Bill of Rights, and then make your design accordingly. And what we now see is that for the last 100 years at least, or more, there's been no attention to the Bill of Rights. In fact, there has been an overt activity to abuse the Bill of Rights for this private agenda, which apparently a lot of people in our elite, quote, elite, and the British and European elite have known. They've just kept the American public in the dark. We're not in the dark anymore. So that's a new factor that they haven't dealt with before.
I like what you just said, because it's what I often say about the U.S. Federal Reserve. Seize their assets, freeze them first. Freeze them, audit them, seize them, take back what is ours, let them declare bankruptcy, and no more contracts to them. That would be true for intelligence, for patents, for services in America, for especially corporate intelligence.
Let me give you one good example of what can be done immediately, and it's totally in President Trump's hands, and that is this Federal Bridge Authority that the CIOs for all the agencies get together and they authorize the certificate authorities that do the digital keys. And those are all in the hands of private corporations. And there are like there's about 8 master authorities, and then they subdivide those into other authorities. And we now know some of those people as Entrust, Symantec, DigiCert, and there's some names that some people know. If you simply relet all of those contracts to organizations that have not had those contracts in the past, you will disrupt this entire system.
Yeah.
Overnight.
You'll unplug it. Yeah.
You don't have to unplug it. What you have to do is basically say,
well, no, but I mean,
you don't get the back doors anymore, folks.
But yeah, that's what I mean. You're unplugging their access.
Yeah, exactly.
Their control. Because, again, if you look at what Serco has run the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, 2006, is it?
2006, they got their first contract. Yes.
Yeah.
By the way, which is not available.
Yeah, which is not available. Right. Of
course. They weren't in the U.S., by the way, until 2008. So who are we giving this contract to in 2006?
Yeah, what's up with that?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, as they say. And so consequently, there's all this stuff going on under the table, and they are letting us have our dog and pony show that we call politics and electing people, and all those people come and go. Meanwhile, there's the career bureaucrats in Washington. Those are the people that are actually performing or not performing their jobs, and they're all acting under the authority of the Senior Executive Service, which is our image of the Queen's Privy Council here in the U.S. And, of course, the Senior Executive Service are generals above all the agencies of government. And there's also the Senior Intelligence Service, which is over the intelligence agencies. But within the Senior Executive Service, you have close to 10,000 generals that can disrupt or not fulfill the wishes of the president or give no-bid contracts to the companies of choice, such as the British company Lockheed Martin, of which the Queen owns the golden share, and on and on. That we've gotten into almost ad nauseum for people to really bone up on what's actually going on here. And I think that at this point, what we have to do is we have to disengage from certain types of activity at this point. I see no other alternative. I see no remedial way of like reforming the Senior Executive Service. You know, you're going to replace 10,000 generals with 10,000 other generals.
How do you reform a corruption?
Yeah, right. It's that there was no provision in the Constitution for the Senior Executive Service. It's an extra constitutional authority. And in fact, it has no actual legal basis in true constitutional law. It's an extra constitutional corporate entity. And so it operates under what would be called at times admiralty law. It's rules and regulations. It's not laws.
And they have a digital system that was let out to Serco.
Yeah.
So the British are running the Office of Personnel Management, which writes the checks that pays the people at Serco.
And Serco is run by the grandson of Winston Churchill.
Lord Rupert
Soames.
Yes.
And the Crown Agents, OPIC, and all the other mechanisms which we can't go into, which we have gone into in the past. Literally, there is no place where money flows that the British haven't put a toll gate and put a tax. And it's the same kind of taxes they put on the in Boston for the tea. By the way, that tea was stale, and that's the reason that they didn't accept the tea, let alone a tax on the tea. Bottom line, Britain, as this document says, from the words of Andrew Carnegie and others, they're not our friends. They've never been our friends. They've never given up on having control of America as a vassal, as a Commonwealth nation, or whatever you want to call it, under control of the monarchy, under the control of the King or Queen of England. And so I think I hear both of you saying there's really no way we have to. You can't just back out of this. This isn't about consciousness. This is about nuts and bolts. They have all these contracts. We have to eradicate them. We have to exfiltrate them. We have to get them out. The subterfuge, the infiltration has been insidiously beyond imagination. So, in this document, in the 1940s, they knew the Brits weren't our friends. And they knew that they pulled us into war after war. In fact, you can't name anything they've actually done for us when you think about it. Except maybe the Beatles.
I like McVitie's.
I knew you guys. I knew you'd come up with something.
I like tea and scones also.
Monty Python.
Yeah, John Cleese.
Mind if I call you Bruce?
Devon cream teas, one of the finest.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Glastonbury. Oh, come on. I mean, I love England. I love Scotland, Wales. The whole thing, Ireland. I love the whole thing. But the deal is, That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about some Germans who came over and took control of the British monarchy, who then continued the controls taught to them by the Venetians, used by the Vatican and the Knights of Malta, and then used to control Washington, D.C. through New York City. So what do? We have to eradicate them, folks. We keep saying it. I didn't know another solution for it. That's what I keep saying. I'm glad to hear both of you don't have a viable plan except to simply pull out of these agreements. And why shouldn't we? It's as simple as saying, sorry, you don't get the contract this year, and maybe no year from here on out. But that doesn't matter. The point is, we don't owe Britain a single thing. The fake intelligence on Syria, where did it come from? The Brits. The fake intelligence on the Straits of Hormuz right now, where did it come from? The Brits. Weapons of mass destruction, where did it come from? The Brits. Anytime you want to talk about a war, look where the intelligence came from. It came from a British-owned American company doing intelligence as a corporate intelligence group usually. And that is the British. That is the British Privy Council, who are not British. They are globalists. As I say, they are citizens of the imaginary United Nations, which Trump is putting an end to. So thank you for this conversation today. It puts us on track in terms of consciousness. It puts us on track in terms of how pervasive this is. And for those who are out there who listen to what John said, become a white hat. Become one of those people who actually stands up for the truth, a whistleblower, a white hat, a patriot, whatever you can do. But remember, America first, not Britain first.